Hi everyone, and welcome to Canadian Redneck Channel. My name's Dave, and today we are back at our bulldozer project. Finally got our much awaited parts here to start putting our engine back together. It took a while, it was a long process, I'll spare you the gory details, but anyway, finally have everything here so we can start putting our engine back together. We're going to start today by test fitting our sleeves and installing the sleeves in the block, and carry on from there, see what time we've got. So I'll get the camera angle set up so you get a view of what I'm doing, and we'll get started. So first thing we want to do with the new sleeves is test fit them to the cylinder block to make sure that everything fits and it's sitting in place the way they're supposed to. They're not standing up, you know, excessively above the deck of the block. Yep, and you should be able to feel a little bit of stand out there so that the gasket seals against the cylinder sleeve. Basically right at the moment I'm just checking, make sure I've got everything cleaned up properly. Now that we've checked that all out, we cleaned the block all up here, made sure we get everything cleaned out, ready for the new parts. So the first thing we do is on the bottom of these is there a wet sleeve, so they take an O-ring and a groove in the block. So we'll install the O-ring and then we'll install the sleeve. So it's just a fat rubber O-ring and it goes in a groove down here in the sleeve in the block. So to install the sleeve through the O-ring you need a little bit of lube. And you don't want to use anything oil-based because that will break down and deteriorate the rubber, and you'll end up with coolant leaking into your oil pan. So a little bit of liquid dish soap does a good job. It's nice and slippery, and you just give her a little coat all the way around, and then it should just pop right down in by hand. Now you want to be careful doing this because it's got a lip here. You don't want to have your fingers around there. You can actually jam the pads off your fingers, get your fingers stuck in here with the sleeve. You don't really want that. So make sure you use the palm of your hand, the flat, and it should just slip right down in like that. With our sleeves installed, now's an opportune time to put in our cam and lifters before we get the crank in there in the road. When I removed the lifters, I numbered them all, put them in this bucket, numbered them from 1 to 8 front to back. And so now, just give them a quick clean off with the rag, make sure that they're clean. And a little shot of oil on each one. And they go back in the great. Back in the appropriate hole. Okay, we're ready to reinstall the cam, so for now we'll just put some oil on the journals where it runs in the bearings. It's time now for our main bearings and crank. So we remove our main caps, take the old bearings out, and we put our new main bearings in. The crank I got had to be turned to 30 on the mains and 20 on the rods, so we buy bearings to match accordingly. These main caps are all number matched to the block. This one here is probably hard to see, but has a 1 stamped in it right here alongside where the washer was. And on the block is a number 1, 2 and 2, 3 and 3. And they are numbered on the cam side. The rear main bearing is the bearing that has the thrust tabs on the side of it. And you roll it carefully in place, making sure that the ends are even. Number 1 and number 2 are just a plain bearing shell, and again you roll them in place, locate the locating tab, and slide them into the journal and make sure the ends are even. So now it's time to lay the crank in. We will need to get our timing marks lined up on our cam ready to mate to the crankshaft. So on the cam we have a single mark on the tooth of the gear, and that will mate with a single mark in the valley between two teeth. When the crank sets in, and then down here that lines up so that we have two marks on the bottom down here, 2 marks on a tooth that lines up with the governor gear when it slides in. There'll be two marks on a valley between the teeth. So we have our timing gears lined up. We're going to put some oil on the bearings here and then carefully lay the crank in. There. And everything is lined up. Get our timing marks lined up here, and crank is all laid nicely in the bearings. Now we put bearings in the caps same way we did in the block, and then they mate together. My manual calls for 75 foot-pounds of torque for these crank bolts, so I'm going to do that basically in 3 stages. I'm going to take my 3/8 ratchet first and just snug them up hand tight, and then with the torque wrench I'll bring them to 40 foot-pounds and then to 75. We're ready now to prepare our piston and rod assemblies for installation. So the pistons in this kit come with the rings pre-installed, and they were already matched to each cylinder. I don't know that it's important that they go in the particular cylinder they came with, but I kept track of it just in case, and so I'm going to make sure that they go with the cylinder that they were shipped with. Now on the piston, yeah, you can see there it says front with an arrow pointing that way, so that goes to the front of the engine obviously. And so when you are installing the pistons into the rods, you got to keep in mind that the number on the connecting rod goes towards the cam side of the engine, which in comparison to front of the tractor means it goes in this way. And so you got to pay attention to that when you put the pistons, put the connecting rods into the pistons. We're ready to install our pistons into our cylinders now. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that the cylinders are clean. And on the piston rings, there's a gap in each ring, and you want to stagger that gap, and you don't want the gap perpendicular to the wrist pin, because that's where the most pressure is on the piston, and it would be more likely to scar the cylinder. So you want those slightly away from the center line of the piston, and you want the gaps basically on opposite sides. And this particular oil ring doesn't really have a gap, so you don't have to worry so much about it. And we will also give the piston a coat of oil. And we put it in our piston ring compressor. And the piston ring compressor has a top and bottom. On the bottom side, there's little crimps in the lip so that it sticks out from the side a little bit, so it will catch the top of the sleeve and not try to force in the piston ring compressor. So you carefully fit it on around the rings and tighten it up. Make sure you have your arrow towards the front. I'm going to do number 2 and number 3 first, because those journals are already down on the crank, farthest away from the connecting rod you can get, so that when I slide the pistons in, there's no chance of the bolts on the connecting rod touching the journal and scarring the journal. Oh yes, and another thing we want to do is put our bearing on there. And we're just going to use a wooden hammer handle, or something similar to that, and just give a light tap down into place. Voila. Okay, we'll get a little oil on our bearings down here. And we'll just carefully reach down in, center them up, and slide the piston upward in the cylinder, and connect the connecting rod to the crank. We're ready to put our governor gear back in now, and it's a good time to just inspect, check the weights, make sure everything's tight, the pins aren't worn and stuff like that, and check your little bearing here at the top, make sure the plunger goes in and out, all that kind of thing. This one here appears to be working correctly, so we'll give the bearing that goes on a little dab of oil. And then we find our marks on here. They're very hard to see, they're very faint, but there are 2 dots in a valley between the teeth that line up with this tooth. There's 2 dots at the base of the tooth there. And where did the dots go? There we go. This is your governor gear here, and it's what they call a flyweight governor. The momentum of the engine will make these weights swing out and pushes against this little piece in the center, and that is a little thrust bearing right there. The weights act on this fork right here, which operates the throttle linkage to the carburetor, and that is regulated by the spring inside the case here. Try to get some light in there so you can see it. The spring down in here in the shade. That's operated by this lever here that goes to the throttle linkage back of the operator's position. The cylinder head calls for 65 foot-pounds of torque. I'm doing that basically in 2 stages. I use my air ratchet first, and it probably brings it to around 30-35, and then the torque wrench will bring it up to 65 foot-pounds. Okay, we're ready to set the valves now, and it's on top dead center number 1. So that's top dead center of the compression stroke. So we know that both valves will be closed there. So I'm going to start with number 1. And the book says 14 thousandths warm. So that being said, the engine's cold right now. I'm going to give it a little extra. I'm going to go for 20 right now, because we'll have to reset them again when we've warmed up the engine. So this is just kind of a preliminary so that things will start and run. So the firing order on this engine is 1, 3, 4, 2. So after doing number 1, we'll turn the engine 180 degrees, and then we can do number 3, because that'll be top dead center on number 3 compression stroke. I'm just going to set the rock arm cover on here for now without the gasket, because for one thing, I'm going to lift by these studs to put the engine back in the dozer, and we don't want to pinch the gasket. And once we start it up and warm it up, I'm going to want to check, make sure that the valves are oiling, and to set the valves once they're warm. And then we'll have to run it again a couple of times, get a few cycles on it, and retorque the head bolts. So for now, that's going to be the basic reassembly of the engine. And so I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, leave that in the comment section below. Please like and share the videos, subscribe to my channel, and as always, Have a great day.